Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Hard Reset for PC. This review is coming to you courtesy of Fusion Bunny. He sent me this, so thank you. It is greatly appreciated. This is a first-person shooter by Flying Wild Hog. It was released in 2011 for PC, and later on they released an extended edition in 2012 that was basically just the original game plus the free DLC, the Exile DLC, which added in 5 new levels as well as some extra enemy types and that sort of thing. So that was to combat one of the main criticisms of this game, which was that it's really short. But it's interesting to note that Flying Wild Hog was made up of developers from the original Painkiller team, which was People Can Fly, as well as former CD Projekt Red and City Interactive developers. So these guys are veterans. They know what they're doing. And so you have to wonder, is the game really good as a result, or was it something else entirely? Well, in the presentation, they certainly did a wonderful, wonderful job, especially with the visuals. The graphics of this game are extremely impressive. Lots of extremely high-quality texture work, modeling, and animation, as well as some really great post-processing effects that really just render this cyberpunk environment in a massive amount of detail. It's very impressive to look at. That said, because of the styling, it is all pretty much just dark grayish colors that really don't pop out all that much. There are a lot of lights in this game, and they're very neon-y, and that's very cyberpunky, but still, most of the environments are pretty dark, and so it makes it actually kind of hard to see where you're going. There's no flashlight or night vision in this game, so it makes things pretty difficult when you're trying to figure out where stuff is, and it's just hidden in the darkness or something, and you have to rely a lot on the lights of the various things. Like the ammo is bright colored, the things you have to interact with are bright green usually, so you have to pay attention to those colors if you want to know where anything is. Otherwise you're going to be stumbling around in this really dark environment and having a hard time actually finding anything. This also makes it kind of hard to see what you're doing when you're actually fighting robots, because you have to pay attention to the lights on them, or for the bigger ones, they actually have colors on them where they have big plates that are painted up, and so you have to pay attention to those. And when you blast the plates off, then they actually have exposed glowing bits. So you have to pay attention to those things to actually see anything in this game. That's kind of a problem, actually. But the visuals themselves are actually very, very impressive. They did a great job with them, as well as the sound design. In particular, the sound effects. They just did a great job with these nice, hard-hitting sound effects for the most part. But then you have the bits that weren't all that great. I mean, the music's okay. It's nothing really that'll impress you. It's certainly no Painkiller soundtrack, but it's a decent kind of metal-y soundtrack to it, and it works okay. There's also some kind of atmospheric electronic music that they threw in there, and it works okay, but it's nothing that'll impress you. But then there's the voice acting, which is horrible. And it's horrible in the sense of it's just really cheesy, and they clearly didn't really put much effort into it. So half the time you're sitting there like, oh gosh, shut up. So because that's just how it ends up being. It's no effort, and in addition, you don't really care about the story or the characters anyway. So whenever they just babble on and on, it gets really annoying. In fact, there's one in particular that sounds like the if you ever hear the National Weather Service alerts, it sounds like those. So it's just they put no effort into this thing in the voice acting department at all, but the rest of the presentation is pretty phenomenal. But it's not really the presentation that matters. It's most of the gameplay, because the story to this game is a convoluted, just ridiculous cyberpunky mess. I really didn't know at any given point what was actually going on. It was just so all over the place that I was like, wait, what? Huh? Huh? In particular, it does a really bad job of introducing characters. I barely caught on to the fact that you play as a guy named Major James Fletcher, only because half the game they refer to him simply as Major, and then towards the end you get Mr. Fletcher all the time. So it's just like, what? Okay, whatever. But I gathered that the CLN, which is what Fletcher's a part of, is the kind of military-ish arm of the corporation which runs Bezor City. And the story itself is that robots have invaded the city and are causing all sorts of havoc in a certain area, and so you're just going in to stop it. And along the way, you end up going off on this tangent of the storyline that ends up going into the corporation, and of course, the corporation's up to no good. They always are up to no good in a cyberpunk thing, and so it deals with that. But that's kind of all I gathered from it. I really didn't know at any given point what I was supposed to be doing. There were actually points in this game where it told me to do something, and I'm like, wait, what? How? Where? Because it was just confusing. The game does a bad job of explaining itself half the time. But that's not really what matters in this game. What really matters is how you play it, because it is an old-school style first-person shooter. It's supposed to be fast-paced, high-intensity, lots of enemies coming at you at once, fairly big arsenal available to you, that sort of thing. And so it's supposed to be just this fun. And it's interesting to note how they've gone about doing this. First off, you only get 2 weapons in this game. Yeah, 2 weapons. You get the CLN modular assault rifle, I think is what it's called, and then a plasma gun. And with these guns, you will be able to upgrade them later on to get different varieties of things that will be using the same ammunition. Like for the CLN gun, for instance, you will modify it and you will get a shotgun and an RPG and a grenade launcher, that sort of thing. So, there is that, and they did a decent job of making all of those weapons feel very different despite being from the same gun, although the way they managed to do that was kind of weird. I don't really know what any of that makes sense. It's, I guess, nanites or something like that. Who knows? Same kind of thing with the plasma gun. It has different attachments. Well, not really attachments. Upgrades. It will switch the configuration that will make it use different things. Like, there's one that's kind of a plasma mortar thing, as well as a smart gun and a rail gun for that one. But, so your entire arsenal is done on these 2 weapons. And to switch the weapon that you want to use, you either hit the appropriate key for the weapon itself, whether it's the CLN gun or the plasma gun, and then you have to use the mouse wheel to actually determine what the way it's going to fire is. And each weapon does have a secondary fire as well that you have to actually unlock through an upgrade. Upgrades are earned by getting nanocurrency, which you get from killing enemies as well as just finding it in the game world, and it's pretty easy to find it. It's this bright orange color that just glows. Like the CLN gun's ammo is red, the plasma gun's ammo is blue, health is bright green, and the nanocurrency is bright orange, and they all glow. So it's pretty easy to find this stuff, even though it says secret areas and all that. Anyway, but that's pretty much the entirety of the game mechanics there. The rest of the game is entirely level design and blasting tons and tons of robots. And they do vary up the enemies. They do have different types of robots, from little ones that run at you and explode, to ones that just swarm you, to ones that are big and hulking and charge at you, or that are basically tanks that will just fire barrages of rockets at you, which gets pretty annoying, actually. And they'll send a lot of these at you at once. And so the thing is that in the original game, the variety of these enemies got pretty small pretty quickly, because they introduce a lot of them pretty early on, and they end up being the same enemies you fight for the rest of the game. They don't really introduce any new ones except for bosses. And yes, there are boss fights in this game. Yes, they're actually kind of pathetic. Basically, you wait for the big glowing shoot this to win thing to pop up on the boss, and you're like, oh, okay, whatever, and you just shoot it. And it's really that simple. But all the while, you'll be swarmed by the smaller robots that are chasing after you, so you have to pay attention to those. And the problem I had with this game was a few things. The first one being the level design, which is actually a lot of corridors. there's a lot of tight quarters in this game, and you don't expect that in an old school first person shooter. You expect a lot of wide open areas with plenty of room to maneuver, and this one doesn't really give you a lot of room to maneuver half the time. So that's something to keep in mind when you're playing this thing. You're not going to have a lot of room to maneuver in a lot of cases. But in boss fights, you'll have plenty of room, but in most firefights, they're going to be taking place in fairly cramped areas, which is kind of annoying. On top of this, you have environments that are completely full of things that will blow up. And you can just shoot those and be like, yay, I win. So, I mean, the environment can take care of a lot of enemies for you, and that's kind of a problem, actually. Because they kind of downplayed the necessity for the smooth, just gunplay. And the weapons in general just don't feel right. Like, the shotgun, for instance, it kind of spreads all over the place, so you never really get a clear indication of how this thing is going to work. And it kind of just makes no sense as to how certain weapons operate. I mean, I never really grasped how the upgrade to the RPG went, where the rockets would become multi-rockets. I never really understood how that worked. I saw it in action at one point, and I'm like, what? That's not what it advertised. The movement felt too sluggish. I mean, you feel like you're made of lead, which is kind of weird. I mean, you don't move that fast. You can't really get precise jumping going on. When you jump, you don't go any faster. So when you're trying to avoid enemies, this becomes a pretty big problem. Dodging out of the way of guerrilla charges when you're being swarmed by things is pretty irritating, because you'll probably not be able to do it. So you'll probably expect to die quite a lot. And it's not the kind of deaths that are like, oh, well, that's fair. I understand why I did that. I can not do this in the future. No, in this one, there's just a lot of bullshit. And it's really that simple. There's a lot of bullshit deaths and not a lot of fair ones. Now, fair being determined as you made a mistake, the enemy AI outsmarted you, something like that. You didn't expect something to happen, and you're like, okay, I can fix this and move on. In this game, it's just kind of up to luck as to whether you're going to survive an encounter or not, and as to whether you have the right weapons for the job. The weapons always feel underpowered, though. That's kind of a big problem. I mean, I had a fully upgraded RPG by the end of the game, and it felt like a pea shooter. Because, I mean, it would take out the small robots, no problem. But when I went up against, say, gorillas, it would still take me 4 or 5, maybe even 6 rockets to take them down. And that was really annoying. Because these are the same enemies I've been fighting since level 1. It shouldn't be like that. So, I mean, I was having tons of trouble with that particular aspect of this game. It didn't really feel fair. It felt like they threw in this stuff to give you an artificial level of difficulty that really shouldn't have been there. It should have been faster paced, the movement should have been much smoother and more fluid, the guns should have just felt better. I mean, when you're firing the shotgun, it feels more powerful than the rocket launcher. That blows your mind. Except when you're going up against bigger stuff, in which case it feels like a pea shooter. So that's a pretty big problem, especially considering that the weapons feeling beefy and powerful is one of the big things from old school first-person shooters. The weapons are supposed to feel beefy and powerful, not like pea shooters. And that's exactly what the weapons in Hard Reset feel like. No matter what you're using, no matter how much you upgrade them, they never feel powerful. And it's not like I'm playing this thing on a hard difficulty. I was playing through it on normal, and they felt like pea shooters. So I don't know what they did to the weapon balancing or the whatever they just did to the game design in general, but the environmental hazards do more damage than your guns do. And I never understood why. It's just this weird thing where pretty much everything in the world around you is meant to just annihilate robots, and your tools for doing so are completely useless almost. I mean, they do enough damage, but they just don't feel like they do any damage. Against the small robots, sure, but against the bigger stuff, they do practically nothing for quite a while. And so that's pretty annoying. Now, as far as replayability goes, I mean, you've played through the campaign, that's pretty much it. But there is a survival mode available, and it's basically just you against hordes of robots. It's literally that simple. So, there is no multiplayer to this game at all, and that's kind of an issue. I mean, I can understand why they would do something like that. It's not like this game is very well balanced for multiplayer, but still, it kind of makes the replayability of this game pretty low. You do get quite a few Steam achievements, but you'll earn a lot of them all at once, and it's not really like it matters all that much. You never feel like you're really achieving anything. It's just like, oh, look, it gave me an achievement for annihilating a robot. Woo. So, it's just, the game feels really underwhelming. And when you're playing through it, you ultimately just get frustrated by it. You never really feel like you're having fun. And that's kind of problematic. I mean, I would expect from the developers of Painkiller to make a game that would be really fast paced, high intensity action, just really fun experience. And this just isn't that. It's not fast paced. It's intense, sure, but you feel like you're moving way too slow. You feel like you don't have enough control over your character. And so ultimately the game just feels pretty lackluster. That's why it gets a 2 out of 5. Thanks for watching.